right of a 40, 3 left.
Hey everybody, it's Tom here, and today I'm looking at one of the best rally games I've played in recent years. It's Dirt Rally 2.0, coming from developer Codemasters, who have had their hands tied for the last 3 to 4 years with their other series like Formula 1 and Grid Autosport. So they've had plenty of time to revise the formula, improve their Ego engine, which is the core of everything they produce, and the focus is very much back on the car and the track, and in particular the weather effects on the track, all mechanics which translate to every console version you can get your hands on. And so today I'll be looking at how the different console versions compare in terms of the frame rate, performance and the resolution and the visual differences. There's a big point in there, especially when it comes to the PS4 Pro versus X comparison later on. So where better to start than at the beginning, and for that I went with the Xbox One X version, which usually is my first port of call when doing these comparisons, just because generally speaking I can expect the most adherent lock to 4K, and that's pretty much what I got. Now if we go straight into the resolutions here, basically what you're getting here is a true 3840 by 2160 as an upper bound on a dynamic res scaler. Now in the worst case I've seen it go down to about 1800p, that's 3200 by 1800, backed by temporal anti-aliasing. That option is on PC, and I can see the kind of hints of that effect on the console versions, every console version. So really good, strong start. X looks incredible. It delivers everything as you'd expect at this crisp level of detail. There is motion blur kind of flanking the car as you drive around these bends and peaks and valleys, but generally it's not too intrusive, and it only kind of helps the end product in terms of smoothing the periphery of the image. It's really good stuff, very pristine image, very happy with that. Now I suppose the headline point for this game is, in terms of comparisons, if we move over to the PS4 Pro version, what we get, it isn't that at all. What you're getting there is 1080p. Now I had to check this several times, I was in just as much disbelief as you might be, but from every track I've tried, it is 1920 by 1080 as the upper bounds. You could assume there is a dynamic res scaler in there on PS4 Pro, but it doesn't deviate from that in my experience. It kind of locks at 1080p, which you kind of expect, given how much power you'd expect there to be left on tap with this console, especially in the context of what X is pushing out by comparison. So in both cases they are going for 60 FPS, but a huge disparity in image quality. Now the other twist to this is there is actually a unique mode on Xbox One X called the 4K mode. It's buried deep in the settings, in the preferences, and basically that gives you the option to keep that 4K native res with the dynamic scaling to 1800p, or by switching it off, you basically get a 1080p image just flat, just like the PS4 Pro. So the option is there, and I suppose it brings up to par with what PS4 Pro is capable of in a lot of games where there is 4K support, in that you could go to the system level settings there and switch it over to 1080p, force it to 1080p at the system level, and then you go into the game and Bob's your uncle, you've got a native 1080p game or a different mode where perhaps performance will be improved. We saw that in Kingdom Hearts 3 for example. So on the one hand it's cool that we do have an in-game 1080p mode on X for those who want it, where performance is maybe not living up to the 60 FPS target. But in this case, as we'll see later on, it's really adherent to the 60 FPS line. It's just a really strong performer, even in the cross rally games I've tried with AI cars. Now that directs our attention to PS4 Pro, where there is no option whatsoever to change it in-game or out. So it's a very strange situation, but Xbox One X has all the options, PS4 Pro just fixed at 1080p. Now if we look at the base PS4, what we get there is 1080p. I'd presume it's dynamic again, but I haven't seen many deviations at all from that 1920 by 1080 native number. So actually it's been really decent on that front. Where things start to fall apart a bit is the base Xbox One. Now in that case I've seen numbers like 1440 by 810 on the cross rally games, where obviously there's a lot going on with the cars, the weather effects as well, the rain, all of that factors in and gives you some of the lower readings on the dynamic res scaler. But still, it can go up to 1080p at best, and it can do that on some stages, especially the earlier ones, like this one with the Argentine rocks. It's a very simplistic stage, and it seems to get away with 1080p a lot of the way. Now going side by side, I think the most prominent part of this is the difference in image quality. But besides that, looking to the distance, you've got a difference in reflection quality, which stands out with routes like the Australian forest. You've got basically a higher quality cube map on the floor on Xbox One X, and that goes for PS4 Pro as well compared to the base PS4. Both the enhanced consoles get high quality, high resolution cube mapping, basically a pre-rendered texture that runs kind of as a layer on the ground for any place where there's like puddles or anything like that. So you'll see things more pixelated on the base consoles, but at a higher resolution. Not that it's very flattering anyway, but it's still a higher resolution texture for the enhanced machines. Where this gets a bit more interesting is that both Pro and X also have screen space reflections, but only when you go to the replay mode. So here's a shot of X versus base Xbox One, and again you can see right away everything is mirrored on the ground on the X machine and nothing there really on the base console. It's kind of a shame that we don't get the same visual upgrade during gameplay itself, but I suppose it makes more sense given these more cinematic angles that you get this sort of flourish. So that goes for both PS4 Pro and X, but it's not really something you'll notice if you don't dive into the replay mode. Now on top of that, you do get higher density of foliage on Pro and X, you get better shadows on X alone, and besides that there's the push and anisotropic filtering to the distance. This always stands out with comparisons with the base machines, but especially so here, and because of the maximum native 4K res on X, you can kind of pick it out much easier on the distance. So there's a lovely texture mapping here on the floor of the Argentine rock stage, and you've got so much detail going into the distance where there's a clear tail off with the base Xbox One and of course base PS4 and Pro as well. You do lose a lot of detail in the move to those other consoles, and it comes down to the anisotropic filtering as well as the base image quality. But besides those differences, Codemasters has been very diligent in getting across some of the major features and assets for every version. So the texture is generally identical up close, no matter what machine you play on. There's no enhanced texture pack for the X console. Other than that, looking at the PC version settings, we have things like God rays, lens flares, chromatic aberration, all enabled for every console. Motion blur is enabled too for every machine. And as I say, temporal anti-aliasing of the PC version is included as well, judging by the artifacting that goes over the top when you're kind of moving, and especially those windscreen wipers which really reveal it. So that's how it pans out for the visual comparisons. A clear-cut victory if you're going with Xbox One X, and I must say one of the most disappointing turnouts for PS4 Pro, but it all kind of comes to bear with performance. So in order, let's go with Xbox One X first, and here we have a pretty straightforward flat 60 FPS line. The interesting thing is on the base Xbox One, I've noticed an adaptive VSync that kicks in, and the telltale sign really is that when you go to a fade to black during cutscenes, the image kind of chops a bit, and you can see right away, oh, this is using an adaptive VSync, okay, I should look out for that. But there's nothing of the sort on the X machine, and to be honest, even in gameplay, even in cross-rally games, which is the biggest stress point I've found so far, I've not seen anything to suggest there's any drops whatsoever. Obviously there's a lot more to play in this game, and there may be scenarios where it really kicks in, but generally speaking, so far so good. The other thing to mention is that the replays run at 30 FPS, so you may have noticed some more stutter during the more cinematic angles in the early comparison. So let's move on to PS4 Pro. Again, as you'd kind of hope from this version, it is locking to 60 FPS, and I don't think it's under much threat given it's almost certainly a byproduct of running at 1080p native, when potentially most games would have done more with their resolutions compared to the X model. So Pro, straight 60 FPS here. Now if we move to the base model, base PS4, we have that again completely across the board, 60 FPS. Now this to me indicates that the base PS4 was really factored in from the start of development with the Ego engine and this game as well. Now if we move to the base Xbox One, this is where we do see some struggles, but again, it's not bad at all. The only real problem with that version is the loss in image quality when it drops below 1080p, which it can do quite often with the more taxing stages, especially with forests. But again, this is the console where you will notice some drops. So if we cut straight to the cross-rally stuff, yeah, this is where the elements come together to really push the hardware. The rain, the AI cars, all combined to bring it down to about, say, 55 FPS, maybe a bit lower, and that adaptive VSync kicks into gear until you get tearing across the screen throughout segments of the race. Not continually, but it is often enough that you will notice it from time to time. And I've noticed this again in another stage. I think it's the Australian forest. It's not going to be too much of an issue generally. I only noticed it around one bend, but it is there. It's a sign that this is the console where there is enough strain to cause some issue. But again, I'm really impressed. Across the board, 60 FPS is the most consistent number you'll get from every version. Now there is one extra complication with the base Xbox One model. In this version and this version alone, I've noticed the animations on the hands of your driver, basically character animations, run at half the refresh, which is really odd when you go to the cockpit view and you're just kind of, your steering wheel actually turns at 60 FPS, but your hands kind of feed through it at half that, at 30. And that goes for the characters on the sides, on the flanks of the track. It looks odd, and you've got to wonder which setting on PC this correlates to. So between the lower resolution, the weakest performance by a margin, and also this small visual downgrade, it's fair to say this version is in last place, but still I came away very impressed with all versions, and I think they do scale pretty evenly according to the power spec. The only exception obviously being PS4 Pro, which remains a disappointment. It really needs something better than it's getting. Anyway, that about wraps up everything I've got here. It is a fine rally game. I've had a huge amount of fun with it. There's a great sense of verticality to so many of these stages, and generally I felt a real connection between the controller, the tactile feedback, and the grip of your car on a track as you feather the analog stick. It's absolutely spot on, and I'd recommend giving it a go if you can. But that's all I've got on Dirt Rally 2 today. If you did find this useful or insightful in any way, do feel free to give me a like or subscribe, and remember to hit the bell to get notifications as any video lands. And of course, this video is uploaded at 4K source quality to our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in contact with me or the team, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.